Hi everyone, welcome to my Libra season 2020 presentation. I have been a bit sick and so I apologise for the tardiness of it. We're a few days into Libra season now and my voice is still a bit croaky, but hopefully it will hold out. For this slideshow and a few thoughts that I've got to share. I'm in my car office again, so I will get rid of my video and yeah, we'll go on. I would like to, oh, I'm frozen. What's going on? There we go. I would like to begin with a little excerpt from T.S. Eliot's poem East Coker from 4 quartets. T.S. Eliot had Sun, Uranus, Venus and Mercury all in Libra rising. I said to my soul, be still and wait without hope, for hope would be hope of the wrong thing. Wait without love, for love would be love of the wrong thing. There is yet faith, but the faith and the love and the hope are all in the waiting. Wait without thought, for you are not ready for thought. So the darkness shall be the light, and the stillness the dancing. And the image comes from Disney's Sleeping Beauty, which was released in 1959, and at that time Disney was largely the creative team, the animation team was largely led by Mary Blair, who had Sun, Mercury and Moon in Libra and Venus in Virgo, and she was an interesting person. So just to meet where we are at, we've had the recent Virgo new moon leaving us in a mercurial lunar cycle, and of course now we are in the Libran solar cycle of the year, ruled by Venus, of course. So I want to give a reminder about those presences in, so Mercury is visible still just for a little bit longer in the evening sky, if we're lucky to have clear skies and a view. And Venus, of course, is still the morning star and beautiful and bright ahead of the dawn. And it has this overlap of seasons has really brought me to thinking again and again about even amidst these difficult times, and any difficult times there is beauty, and perhaps the beauty may be our salvation if we allow ourselves to notice and dwell with that beauty for moments throughout our days and nights and difficulties. So there's been a mutable cross activated during Virgo season, and especially heightened with the Virgo new moon, which for me has been about, well, it's led to my consideration of what is ready for harvest, what is ready for release, and what is ready for transmutation. As we come to the end, as Virgo season ends and Libra season begins, it's that transition period, Virgo being then a transitional archetype and Libra being the commencement of a new season again, which I'll talk about in a minute. But just to the mutable cross is ongoing, those energies throughout the rest, well, it remains at the moment and continues through this season, this Libra season, as once Venus enters Virgo and will oppose Neptune. But yes, it just has made me consider these mutable energies and how we can become so the South Node being in Sagittarius, of course, and that at that one end of the spectrum we have that fundamentalist and like condemning kind of energy where we get really stuck in one particular way of, like, one particular belief, for example. Our own experience leads us to have a very rigid kind of view of how things are. Being, you know, the North Node in Gemini and that Gemini energy being like sort of that living above the neck potential, and perhaps talking out of turn maybe, and thinking too much and having all the answers, and you know, that's kind of on the axis of Gemini Sagittarius, perhaps having all the answers, but being able to argue anything, kind of. Yeah, and then of course the square to Neptune retrograde in Pisces, and the disillusionment that's going on in the world, and, you know, the head in hands kind of despair at the lack of leadership and those kinds of things, as well as the need for people to escape, that people feel so so confused and lost and despairing that there seems for many to be no viable option other than escaping the pain of that situation, rather than facing up to it, perhaps. And then of course the sun and moon and Mercury and Venus going through Virgo, and the capacity to become hypercritical and finding faults incessantly, and pointing those faults out with a big Gemini mouth sometimes, and yeah, and there being, you know, these energies playing out on a sort of more negative end of the spectrum, and there being a capacity within all of us to sort of move consciously towards the other end of the spectrum, where we become more open to the truths that belong to other people, and just allow people to have their own truths and their own experiences, and have faith in that phenomenological, there's that word again, perspective, where we, you know, just let things be as they are for others, and have that willingness to hear those experiences of others, and a curiosity and open-mindedness when it comes to things that we don't necessarily understand, even though we might think we do, and we don't always. And as well with the North Node in Gemini, I just wanted to introduce the idea for those who don't know of it. Aboriginal Australians have an idea, a word, dadiri, which is like deep listening, like silence and deep listening, not only to one another, not only to our fellow human beings, but also to all the other beings on the planet, not only animals even, but the wind in the leaves and the ocean and the sky and all of those things. So that real connection with nature seems to me like a beautiful way of looking at the North Node in Gemini, and learning how to listen, and also to express ourselves back to that, which I believe is again in the Australian Aboriginal sort of dreaming way of looking at it, is that yoro yoro, everything in its place, everything has its place, everything is in its place, and we need to be open to and open with everything. So yeah, and of course, you know, with Pisces and Neptune, the capacity to become compassionate in our relationships with other people rather than condemning or converting or shutting people down or holding grudges, you know, that lack of forgiveness. Maintaining a grudge is really hard work. Forgiveness can be a real liberation for ourselves as much as for others. And yeah, with the Virgo, of course, the capacity to analyze and discern meaning, you know, that Sagittarian thing, and having that sensitivity to nuance and subtlety that Virgo is so well attuned to, that we can see all the many tones and shades, and yeah, tapping into that at the moment rather than getting too polarized, because I feel like the polarity, which is where we're going next with Libra season, with our conversation about Libra season, is very big now. And yeah, but allowing ourselves to participate in this process of change and identifying the ways that we perhaps engage in all these kinds of perhaps less positive behaviors, and it kind of keeps us stuck in this story of, you know, whether it's victimhood or you know, trauma or whatever it is. But you know, we can get stuck sometimes when we don't allow things to move. And of course, the nature of the mutable signs is endings, change, and movement in that way, that mutability. So and the process of change is both passive and active, and we can be engaged with it and we can allow it to happen to us as well. Yeah, so, and it's obviously happening whether we engage with it or not. So how can we benefit from it is my question. Yeah, so leading from that into Libra. So I have this quote from Marion Woodman from her amazing book, Addiction to Perfection. To identify with one or the other, extremes of black and white, can only lead to plunging into its opposite. The ratio is cruelly exact. The further I move into white radiance on one side, the blacker the energy that is unconsciously constellating behind my back. The more I force myself to perfect my ideal image of myself, the more overflowing toilet bowls I'm going to have in my dreams. So yeah, we have had the equinox on my time, Australian Western Standard Time, the 22nd of September. The sun ingressed into Libra and remains applying to oppose Black Moon Lilith and Chiron. And perhaps this is a positive that's come out of my delayed recording of this talk, is that I've had a few days of experiencing this Libra season and have noticed a few things coming up, and perhaps it's particularly in relation to, I guess my attention is a lot on Chiron at the moment, being as we're coming to the midpoint of the retrograde season, retrograde phase of Chiron's or cycle, and the sun will oppose Chiron in the next few days. I'll give you the dates for that in a minute. And yeah, so as well, Mercury opposite to Eris and square to Capricorn, while trining the North Node and entering the retrograde shadow zone. All of that occurred at the equinox. So the last few days are worth reflecting on in terms of what's emerging as Mercury descends as the evening star and applies to conjoin Juno, and those kinds of things that are going to be coming up for the Mercury retrograde later in this season, in this Libra season. So and Venus, of course, separating from the conjunction that was at 18 degrees of Leo a few days ago. It was, I think it was the 21st. And now they're separating now. Venus is, I think, at 23 or the 24th degree of Leo, and trining the South Node and sextile the North Node. And so nice to tune into her again for guidance, especially this month. And within that grand fire that occurred, that created a grand fire trine, that conjunction with Venus and Vesta as well. So that was sort of part of setting the tone for this season and what we can tune into. So the South Node, of course, in Sagittarius, and Mars and Eris retrograde in Aries made up that grand fire trine. And a very creative, for me, that feels so creative and so powerful in terms of aspects to do with the dark feminine, with Eris and Mars, not just the dark feminine, but the dark feminine working with that masculine capacity to move forward. So even though they're both retrograde at the moment, something's happening between those two that can be of benefit to us all, of course. And for me, that feels very much to do with allowing for the penetration of Mars energy and that masculine energy within the Eris dark feminine, all that potential unconscious painful stuff that can also come through from the South Node in Sagittarius, and all this condemnation and like all the belief systems that have perhaps fed into this unconsciously carried idealism, perhaps, that's sort of led us to a point where we can't really ignore things anymore. And that Vesta Venus conjunction, that's so, they have a to have like that focus and that devotion to the sacred and the sacred beauty, that beauty in itself is sacred and needs to be honored as such and given a bit of time and energy to focus on. That is important this month, I think. And as well, Juno was trine to Ceres at this time, and their synodic cycle is interesting and erratic, and this current cycle dates back to multiple conjunctions through the 60s and 70s, so far as I can see, and the next cycle will not commence until 2046. So it's interesting to think about Juno and Ceres, but I'm not going to get long-winded about that now, my thoughts about that. But yes, they were trine at the beginning of Libra season. I wanted to share this poem from the wonderful poet writer Linda Hogan. This is actually not the complete poem, but it's called The Women Speaking. And the Russian women in blue towns are speaking, the flower-dressed women of India, women in orange tents, dark women of the Americas who sit beside fires, have studied the palms of their hands and walk towards one another. It's time to bless this ground. Their hair is on fire from the sun, and they walk narrow roads toward one another. Their pulses beat against the neck's thin skin. They grow closer. The image comes from, it's called Blue Flower from Georgia O'Keeffe, who had Venus Uranus in Libra. And I just wanted to also go back to this slide, which mentioned Georgia O'Keeffe, this painting as well, Flying Backbone, I love. Is Georgia O'Keeffe was born just after the Juno Ceres conjunction in Aries, around at the end of the 19th century. There were multiple conjunctions of that, so just meant to mention that. But yeah, just to honour this sisterhood, and this Vesta as the sister, and this movement that's irrefutable. Women seem to be rising up in, and this is not to exclude men by any stretch, but there seems to be a real movement of women who are feeling compelled now to stand up, to rise up, to have their voices heard, to speak up. So yeah. Okay, so the sun in Libra, of course, there's a few themes worth mentioning here that have come up for me in the last few days while I've been sick, as I mentioned, which it's interesting for me, I seem to get sick every Libra season. Libra is my rising sign, so it's my first house, and I'm often sick at the Aries full moon. So it's that axis of 1st to 7th house. But Libra, of course, is about balance, and of course balance is not a set and forget, is it? It's a verb, it's a dynamic process, a constant movement, like the yin yang. It's that the two swirling energies that are always responding to one another and compensating for one another. And that is such an important point that is so relevant to these times, so relevant to me. For Eris and Eris is often linked to Libra, and I like the connection between Eris and Libra. I think they really fit. I think that Libra is very much about that compensatory capacity, and it is so often unconscious, and Libra is so attuned to that harmonizing and balancing and finding equilibrium, which can mean it's a very complex thing, it's a very nuanced thing, it's very yeah, and I think often that process, that it seems like people pleasing sometimes, and it can be, of course, and it seems like adaptation, like extreme adaptation, I've put there, and that is certainly a shadow of Libra that can happen. We can adapt ourselves into anonymity almost, where we don't ever know what we want, and so we don't act in pursuit. The sun is in fall in Libra, it doesn't operate in that same way as like Aries, knowing exactly what it wants and acting. Maybe Aries doesn't necessarily know consciously exactly what it wants, but it just acts, and Libra is, of course, so much more considered and just responsive, but yeah, and there is that capacity for peace at any price, trying to make things nice at all costs kind of thing. That is part of it, but that is not all of Libra. That is kind of perhaps just a limited view of Libra, but I think Libra can be quite willing to go out on a limb to balance things, in the sense that that maybe doesn't make sense, out on a limb to balance things, but definitely, yeah, the compensation is so fundamental to Libra, I think, and fundamental to Eris. And yeah, I really think that that's important in what we're seeing in the world at the moment. And of course, the middle way, the grey, the blending of the opposites, the blending of black and white, and holding the tension of the opposites, as Jung said, and finding the middle way, like the Buddhists say. And yeah, I think that's noble, and I think can be helpful too, but I might say more about that in a few minutes. I want to share this quote which I came across in the last few days, revisiting an old favourite book of mine, which is called The Alchemy of Illness by Kat Duff. And it's relevant because through these times of pandemic, when it's, at least people are saying that everybody's sick, a lot of people are dying. I don't know, like the numbers are interesting, and there's a lot of talk about inflated numbers and misinformation and those kinds of things. But regardless, what's being said, the narrative of the time is that there's sickness en masse. And so this quote I wanted to share: sick people often allude to the limitations of what we know as health, the one-sidedness of its ready optimism and confidence, the withering effects of its constant activity and interaction. English author Margiad Evans wrote that too much health is like too much light. It blinds. Illness pulls our awareness into the deepest recesses of self. From that perspective, our previous lives of busy well-being often seem misguided. And I think there's a lot of people obviously who don't believe in coronavirus, or they don't see it as a threat, and see the social isolation as the threat, and the social distancing and all those things, which I get that. I see where they're coming from. I see what they mean, and I can certainly agree with that to some extent, at least. But I also think that within this time of, we've had 6 months of this now, so this has been going on throughout this zodiacal year. Since Aries season is when it all sort of hit the fan, and everyone's been, and I know some people have been extremely isolated, and that can become pathological almost for some people who may be more sensitive to that sort of situation than others, and not so introverted perhaps. And there are so many variables, but the point I want to make is that when we're thrown back upon ourselves and on our own resources, our own inner resources, things can happen in that situation of suffering, sickness, and isolation that can't really happen any other way. And that is a lot to do with Chiron as well, in my view. So, we've had the Cardinal T-square, which is active all season and heightens from the Aries full moon in a few days, and the quincunx with Ceres retrograde on the 23rd, and the sextile with Hygeia today, and the opposition with Chiron on the 30th, which of course is the midpoint of the retrograde, as I mentioned. So that Chiron piece is really important this month, as he retrogrades. Well, he's halfway through that retrograde phase, and an illumination can come about in these few days now about, and of course under the light of the full moon, which is conjoined with Chiron. So it'll be interesting to see what comes up, and but I'm very poised to try and hear that message, because I think it's just so fundamental. There's so much about Chiron that feels to me to be about our human frailty and our willingness to remain vulnerable in the face of everything, rather than being guarded, and and that whole heroic Aries energy, that impulsive, instinctual, courageous warrior, it needs to recognize its frailty and its limitations, and that there's a time and a place for all of that, absolutely. within the context of our very normal, mundane lives even. There's great call for courage at times, and but as well, sometimes the most courageous thing is to be vulnerable, and it's really hard to be vulnerable sometimes, and Chiron is what teaches us that heart opening willingness to be human, to be flawed and fragile, and just to feel into that. And then that is where real human connection can occur, when we're willing to be in that place and be witnessed being that frail being. And that can come through the experience of being ill or sick or wounded or grieving or failing, or those difficult moments of humanness. And yes, of course, so there are the rest of the aspects there, which I may not go through because I don't want this to be too long of a talk, but there they are. I want to mention actually the third quarter square moon in Cancer, which creates that cardinal cross on the 11th of October. So that's following on from the full moon. And is there anything? Oh, the opposition with Mars, which I'll speak about as well a little later, as being the midpoint of the Mars retrograde in the middle of October, the 14th of October, my time. And a couple of days later, the midpoint of Eris's retrograde, which is also at the new moon. So that is another, that's a strong lunar cycle upcoming with the Libra new moon. We'll also talk about that. I want to share this quote from D.H. Lawrence, who had Uranus, Venus, and a new crescent moon in Libra. And the beautiful painting, grey lines with black, blue, and yellow, again from Georgia O'Keeffe. Oh, what a catastrophe! What a maiming of love when it was made a personal, merely personal feeling, taken away from the rising and setting of the sun, and cut off from the magic connection of the solstice and equinox. This is what is the matter with us. We are bleeding at the roots because we are cut off from the earth and sun and stars. And love is a grinning mockery because, poor blossom, we plucked it from its stem on the tree of life and expected it to keep on blooming in our civilized vase on the table. Felt very Libran to me. Here's the chart for the Aries full moon conjunct Chiron on the 2nd of October. And of course, I've got there the Mars Eris retrograde with Black Moon Lilith as well, very prominent, square to Pluto retrograde and Saturn. And Saturn's almost stationing direct now, slowed to almost station direct. So of course the Aries full moon is the harvest moon in the northern hemisphere, the full moon, first full moon of the autumn or fall. This full moon makes me think about Newton's third law, that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction, and again it ties into that compensatory nature, like whether we're aware of it or not. Things have a natural balance, things find a natural balance, and Libra season really brings that up. And in the context of what we're seeing in the world now, and the context of, looking at Aries is like me, I, and who am I within this context of the system, being like patriarchy, if you want to call it that, or status quo, or consensus reality. But not only that, it's also to do with the cosmos and the powers that really be, there's the powers that be in terms of like the human, like the system that we live under. And sure, there are there's a, so much information, misinformation, whatever, being shared at the moment, going viral, whatever. And no matter how you sort of look at everything, there's clearly toxicity, there's clearly oppression, there's clearly severe wrongs being done by the system to the people, to the me's and I's all over. But as well as that, there's the cosmic order, and the cosmic disorder, and they work in that yin yang way. And so despite appearances, and it can look so bad, it can feel despairing to look at the way the world is now, and to wonder how it will ever right itself. But I endlessly optimistic Sagittarian moon, I believe in the compensatory nature of the unconscious and of the cosmos to right itself. And even though it looks hopeless, somehow this is part of the righting of the wrongs, I hope, I think. And yeah, so that sort of fits into this Aries full moon for me, in the sense that we may see and feel how within the Mars retrograde, and to varying extents, having experiences of being thwarted, and of course no one's doing what we had planned we'd be doing at this time this year. 6 months ago the world looked very different to how it looks now, and sort of coming from that new moon, so the Aries new moon in March that was conjunct Chiron, and now we're at the full moon of that cycle, and it's like there's a lot to reflect on. There's a lot to see in the past 6 months, and what journey have we taken to come to this point? And are we learning to embody authority and agency? Are we learning to be the authors of our own lives? Are we integrating that, all these energies? If we don't want to live in the system as it is, what are we going to do about it? And it can be a very humbling experience, and I feel like that's the Chiron piece, that it's sort of like, what can I do? But we can always do something, and I think that something comes out of that humility to be like, head in hands, what the hell can I do? And to get into that low point of like, man, it just seems really impossible, and then something comes out of that willingness to go into that vulnerability again, and what are we going to make of this situation for ourselves? What are we learning from this is the question. And I think that there's so much to learn from this year, for, of course, in the context of history, and like one day this will all be a memory, and it will serve as something. We'll look back on it as something, and we'll look back on it as coronavirus, of course, and the world coming to a standstill almost, and what that means within a larger historical context remains to be seen. But it's too easy to take the postmodern kind of view and look at it in a real new age sense. I think we do have to have a bit of a broader view about context, and to really I'm going off on a different tangent there, but history is relevant, and we can learn a lot through that willingness to look back on these larger cycles, and on the people who stood out as leaders in those times, not necessarily leaders in the political sense, but sometimes in that sense, but also the artists. For me, it's always the artists who have something so important to share throughout history. And I love looking at that in relation to astrology. So, and as well, not forgetting, of course, the Libra piece of all of this, and that we learn who we are through relationships with others and through that comparison kind of thing that goes on with looking at who we are similar to, who we are dissimilar to, how we identify with others and not so much, and who we like and who we dislike, and all of those kinds of understandings that we have, and then creating our own identity out of that. So yeah, it's all interesting under the light of the Aries full moon. Another Georgia O'Keeffe called Red Canna, and Rumi, who was a Libra. Pain comes from seeing how arrogant you've been, and pain can bring you out of this conceit. After all, a child cannot be born until the mother has pain, and you, whether you know it or not, are pregnant with real trust. The words of prophets and the saints are midwives that can help, but first you must feel the pain. To be without pain is to use the first person wrongly, saying I am this and I am that. I at the wrong time brings a curse, but I at the right time brings a blessing. I have included this image from Good Will Hunting, and this quote, do what's in your heart and you'll be fine. And the quote comes actually from Robin Williams' character Sean, who is the psychologist in the film. But the image is taken from the very poignant moment that really changes the course of Will's life, presumably. And this film was written by Matt Damon and Ben Affleck when they were young men, and they'd grown up as best friends. And Matt Damon has Sun in Libra and Pluto in Virgo, and Ben Affleck has Venus in Cancer rising and Pluto in Libra, just Pluto in Libra, and Matt Damon's just got Pluto in Virgo. They're born close together, so a couple of years apart maybe, but it just, yeah, it's a film about love and friendship and learning how to trust and how to be in relationship, and it just feels very Libran to me, as well as like the crossover from Virgo to Libra, and that humbling moment where your friend tells you how it tells you what you need to hear, like not what you want to hear but what you need to hear, and it's brutal truth, and it's exactly the right medicine. And yeah, I just wanted to include that as a thing to reflect on for this time and this space. So Mercury, as I've said, is the evening star still, and slowing to and descending to station retrograde. Makes a third quarter square with Saturn retrograde, or already has done, I'm sorry, and has entered the shadow zone, as I mentioned, and opposed Mars already on the 24th, and today ingresses Scorpio. Then we'll conjoin with Juno on the 30th of September in just a few days' time, and we'll square Hygeia in Leo on the 3rd of October, making a quincunx with Chiron on the 4th of October. Chiron's still retrograde, of course, and oppose the true black moon Lilith and Uranus on the 8th of October. So all of this pointing to, for me, this is so much about the Mercury retrograde. Leading into that now that we're in the shadow zone. So the retrograde goes from the 15th of October until the 3rd of November, from 11 degrees of Scorpio to almost 26 degrees of Libra, 25 degrees of Libra. There is at the station a fixed T-square between Mercury and Juno conjunct, opposite to Uranus in Taurus and square to Hygeia in Leo. And it just feels to me very potent in terms of a healing that can come through this Mercury retrograde process, to the extent that we are able to creatively engage with it. And I always love to engage with Mercury retrogrades. I think like there's 3 times a year we get this amazing opportunity to sort of traverse in reverse this terrain that we've already sort of had, but we can, of course, in our busy lives and the busyness of the monkey mind, overlook things and not even be paying any attention whatsoever to things. And Mercury retrograde gives us the opportunity to have a second chance at that, and it's really cool. It's not always pleasant, but it is certainly an opportunity for creative growth and learning and those cool things. So for me, it feels like time to reflect upon Juno's long passage through Libra. So Juno was in Libra from the 4th of November, and recently during Virgo season ingressed into Scorpio finally. So a long time, 10 months almost, Juno has been in Libra, and I have felt that has been very much a part of the coronavirus and 2020's story, a very like much neglected part. If it had been different, sort of, if there'd been less to pay attention to, it probably would have received a lot more attention. She probably would have received a lot of attention, being, you know, creating this cardinal cross and square and all of that. But as it is, yeah, I haven't really heard much being said about her. So I'm wondering, will we remain committed or will we release? What will we remain committed to? What will we let go of? And it's time to have a look at that and what's going on within the context of our own personal lives. And the Cazimi will occur on the 26th of October, the midpoint of that retrograde. We'll see how it plays out, won't we? Sure, there'll be plenty to reflect upon on the other side. And my hero, John Lennon, being honest might not get you a lot of friends, but it'll always get you the right ones. He had Sun in Libra, of course, and Moon in Aquarius, opposite to Chiron and Pluto in Leo, and square to Mercury and Ceres in Scorpio. And this quote just feels like that to me. And I just, you know, there's something about that brutal honesty of Mercury in Scorpio, and it certainly, yeah, it doesn't necessarily win you a lot of fans, but it's a good, possibly a good conversation starter, possibly puts conversation to a very abrupt end. But yeah, it's interesting. Venus and the Sphinx as she moves from Leo into Virgo. We had the throat chakra moon gate, and I've had a sore throat and a croaky throat, and ever since about then. And how we communicate and whether our communication is authentic. So I don't know if I've actually explicated what I mean when I'm talking about these moon gates, which is a shamanic astrology term as I understand it, and it correlates to Inanna's descent to the underworld to her sister Ereshkigal. And what happens is that Inanna passes through 7 gates, and at each gate she must lay down a garment, an adornment, some part of her being she must sacrifice as she passes through each of these gates. And these gates correlate, of course, to the chakras and therefore to some aspect of our being in our own personal experience. And it's really a beautiful thing to participate in, and I absolutely love trying to attune to it. And we get a month, you know, to spend with that chakra and to consider what's coming up in our lives and subconsciously into consciousness and all of those things. And so, yes, so the throat chakra moon gate on the 14th of September brings us to a month where we are now in this month of assessing our capacity to communicate and to lay down our inauthentic communication, to lay down our concealment, our tendency to hide things, our tendency to not say things that need to be said, to channel a little bit of John Lennon and just blurt it out, man. Just say it like it is. Say it like we see it. Like it doesn't. That's the important thing I think about, like the mutable cross as well, and like it's important to be able to say things as we see them, but we have to know that might not actually be how things are. So there's also that need to be both reverent and irreverent, and to not be too attached, like to have a sense of humor, and that as well. Like I feel like that's a Chiron piece, that Chiron doesn't take himself too seriously. That's what makes him wise. He is the wise teacher. He mentors all the heroes, but his wisdom comes from knowing that he is flawed and wounded, and our wisdom likewise comes out of that experience of feeling into being wounded, being flawed, never being able to be perfect, and recognizing that. Yeah, and so to tie that back to this throat chakra moon gate and what we might possibly lay down in this phase of Venus's descent, yeah, what needs to be said? I say croakily, what needs to be said? What remains unsaid? And so learning how to find our voice. And of course, so on the corresponding Venus as the evening star, and her ascent, and she again, there's the same moving through each of the chakra gates, with the new crescent moon aligning with her, signaling that the moon gate of each month. And then we pick up through the same chakra energy something. So in this instance, for the throat chakra, it's about finding the voice. Once we've laid down the inauthentic voice, we reclaim our capacity to speak. Yeah, but I think that in laying down this inauthentic communication, invariably that leads to a finding of authentic voice. So yes, so already Venus has made the quincunx to Neptune retrograde on the 23rd, and also the quincunx to Pluto on the 26th. That was yesterday. Trine to Mars, of course, in a couple of days, and that's a moment as Venus and Mars travelled almost trine to one another for weeks and weeks earlier in the year, when Mars was mostly in Aquarius and Venus was mostly in Gemini. Yeah, and there may have been some crossover with signs there, but it was weeks of almost trining, never quite completing. Now that trine is completed on the 29th of September. So something of that cycle, which began last Virgo season, the beginning of September last year, 2019, is coming to that trine point now, and coming to like an expression, an ease of expression, and something. Yes, so reflecting upon that is very worthwhile. Always being aware of these many cycles that are active within our lives, but yeah, a nice thing to be aware of amidst the Mars retrograde, more challenging energies. The opposition between Venus and Ceres. Ceres is going to ingress into, or regress, should I say, into Aquarius, now at 0 degrees of Scorpio, of Pisces. And Venus will ingress into Virgo on the 3rd of October, and the heart chakra gate, as a follow-on from the throat chakra gate, will be on the 14th of October, which of course, if that rings any bells, aligns with the Mercury retrograde commencement, stationing retrograde, and as well the Mars retrograde midpoint. So the middle of October, the days around this time are very, very potent indeed. Very much worth being awake. So yeah, and for me, this again ties into the theme of Libra season being so closely aligned with the Chiron piece, the heart defended against pain and suffering, and the invulnerability, that unwillingness to drop our guard, to drop our defenses. We need to lay down that it's like an instinct, isn't it, to be guarded sometimes, and to get defensive, and to maintain like very rigid boundaries, even like, and sometimes, I mean, this is a very slippery slope and a very awkward conversation to have, because of course we are entitled to have boundaries and to not have people overstep them, and yes, we can set clear boundaries with people, and all of that is very healthy, but it can become, we just need to be very honest with ourselves and have that Virgo capacity to appraise what's going on within ourselves, because we can definitely use it to defend ourselves rather than to be vulnerable and open and real with people. So all of that, all themes around that, I think emerge as a result of this heart chakra moon gate that opens at mid-month, as the waning crescent moon aligns with Venus in the dawn sky. That's how we identify that happening. And then Venus will oppose Neptune, and that cycle, I haven't really been mentioning the cycle commencement because I find it takes up a lot of time in these talks to always link it back to the beginning of the cycle. But yeah, yes, it's Venus and Neptune were conjoined. Now my mind's gone blank. It was, or April, I think. I don't even have my ephemeris on me to double check it now, but yeah, you might have to check your own ephemeris there, I'm sorry. Okay, so this beautiful, it's not the greatest image, but it is a beautiful blue statuette from Ptolemaic Egypt in the 2nd century BCE, and it now finds her home at the Brooklyn Museum. She is the Venus I've practiced saying this word, Anadyomene. So she, this ringing of her hair, this is a common thing we find in Venus imagery, in Aphrodite imagery. As she comes from the water, she is wringing her hair because she's been submerged in an ocean of, she rises up from the sea having been submerged. This is like central to the idea, to Venus as an archetype. And I listened recently to a conversation, a talk given by Thomas More and also James Hillman, that is about Aphrodite. And Thomas More, who has sun in Libra, he speaks about Venus's nature being to rise up, and as well linking her to, of course, being the daughter of Uranus, and therefore relating to disruption. And she often poses a threat to our fidelity because of her seductive and persuasive nature. I just think these are really important and rich things to give consideration to through Libra season, because it's that experience of the shiny object that catches our eye in a shop window, and that experience is the portal into the Venus realm, that attraction, the alluring nature of Venus, where, and Thomas More talks about it as well in terms of like travel experiences, in the sense that we might visit a place and want to stay there and think, I could live here, and but of course we can't do that. We can't just pack up and live in every place that catches our fancy, and we can't take off into a new relationship every time somebody, well, perhaps we can, but certainly it makes for a chaotic kind of life to be following that Venusian whim all over the place. And yes, it's very beautiful, it's very alluring and seductive and persuasive to let ourselves sort of go into that fantasy. And but yeah, it's not exactly the makings of a stable kind of life, but yeah. And as well, he speaks about Venus and the superficial and a simple appreciation for beauty. And he says not everything has to be deep, and makes a very funny joke about Sigmund Freud's, you know, he references Sigmund Freud sometimes as a cigar is just a cigar. And it's, you know, sometimes things can just be pretty or beautiful, and that's enough. It doesn't always have to be this deep dive into experiential phenomenology. It's sometimes things are just worth enjoying. And with that in mind, I'll go to another Libran, amazing Libran, Oscar Wilde, who had Sun and Venus in Libra and Pluto in Taurus. Some quotes from this man: one should either be a work of art or wear a work of art. In all unimportant matters, style, not sincerity, is the essential. In all important matters, style, not sincerity, is the essential. I don't know how true these are, but there's certainly good meditations on that Libran Venusian perspective. Behind the perfection of a man's style must lie the passion of a man's soul. A well-tied tie is the first serious step in life. The only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about. Everything popular is wrong. It is better to be beautiful than to be good, but it is better to be good than to be ugly. Be yourself. Everyone else is already taken. And finally, perhaps the most profoundly, you don't love someone for their looks or their clothes or for their fancy car, but because they sing a song only you can hear. I think that's very true about love and the Libran experience of that capacity to harmonize with another. And I think it's Stephen Forrest who differentiates, he talks about Venus as the function of rejection, that we, in order to find the one we want, we've got to go through the ones we don't want, and we've got to be able to identify those. Okay, Mars retrograde, of course. Mars is big and beautiful and bold in the eastern sky in the evenings, and quite ominous, kind of looking very red, getting redder, getting very orange at least at the moment, and getting brighter and very prominent out there. And I listened and would recommend Adam Gainsbourg's talk with the Cosmic Intelligence Agency, CIA. He does a lot of good work and a lot of research into the cycles, of course, of Venus, and he wrote that very good book about Venus's cycle, and hopefully he'll do the same with Mars. But for the time being, he's making content available about the Mars cycle. So he says that Mars represents the instinct to do what I am. It is pre-personal, unfettered action and engagement. He says, do what I am, in stark contrast to be who I am. he differentiates between the two, and I really like that. I really feel like that's very true, that we sort of instinctively do our Mars. We just can't help but do it, in whatever way that might come across with, like, yeah, and to sort of kind of try to any sort of seeking to avoid that only distorts it, and it's much more healthy to deal with unrepressed things than, I mean, it's a lot more hard work once things have been repressed, isn't it? So we are in the middle of a Mars in Libra cycle, which commenced in September 2019 with the emergence of Mars as a morning star in Libra, as I understand it, and that cycle continues through until October 2021. So attuning to the emergent themes and insights and messages around that Sun in Libra opposite to Mars retrograde, which is, as I've said, the midpoint, and occurs, as I've said, 14th of October. There will be no doubt some illuminations occurring around this time, and again, Adam Gainsbourg speaks about it as the radical commitment, as this part of the journey, as pertaining to the radical commitment to one's authentic vision, masculine dreaming, as in not male, but masculine in our capacity to act in pursuit of something, but to let this unfold, watching what's happening within our lives and letting it unfold. And then at the same time, as I mentioned, so there's that concurrent moon gate. Luna conjoins Venus in Virgo in the dawn sky, and they will be also sextile to Mercury and Juno in Scorpio ahead of that Mercury retrograde, which as well starts on the 14th of October. So it's just an interesting and very potent time around there, as I've already said. And again, Adam Gainsbourg talks about the disorientation and reorientation that follows on from that midpoint of the retrograde. So from around the 15th of October, there may be experiences of disorientation and reorientation that we can look into more deeply within our own psyches. I've made this slide with some red on it just to show. So normally the red would correlate to the retrograde point. The red in this case is the Mars retrograde. The other planets, however, are direct. So we've got the first four there: Pallas, Jupiter, Pluto and Saturn, all retrograde at the point of the first quarter square to Mars. And of course, at that time, Mars was direct, and those other four planets in Capricorn were all retrograde. So those occurred at the end, from end of July to end of August, that first square. Then this being take 2, Mars retrograde, square to Saturn stationing direct on the 30th of September. That is exact. Exact square with Pluto on the 9th of October, by which point Pluto will also be direct. Jupiter also direct on the 19th. The square will occur on the 19th of October, and the square with Pallas on the 24th of October, all during Mars's retrograde period. Then we'll have the third installment, the third and final pass of this first quarter square. So looking back, Mars, of course, being in Capricorn and making the conjunction with all of these planets, and then so now coming around to the first quarter square and a second bite at that, so the second pass of the first quarter square, and into the end of the year, end of 2020, beginning of 2021, we have the third bite of that cherry of Mars square to, by then, Mars will square Pluto on the 23rd of December, just ahead of the, just on the tail of the great mutation conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn, of course, which occurs on the solstice. So more very interesting times ahead, of course. Mars by this stage will be in Taurus and then square Saturn on the 13th of January 2021. 2021 starts with a bang, of course. And then Mars will square Jupiter in Aquarius on the 23rd of January, and Pallas who by this time will be in Aquarius as well, on the 27th of February. I hope that was relatively clear. But just to give a little, so much is being said about Mars square Saturn, and it's a very potent and sometimes difficult, often to be truthful, difficult and very uncomfortable at times, and yes, much experience of frustration. Of course, frustration is the word often used to describe that interaction between Mars and Saturn. But I just came across this quote from Liz Green's book, and now I'm sure it was The Astrology of Fate, and I should have written it there. She has, I should say, Venus, Jupiter, Neptune, and Mars in Libra, sextile to Pluto in Leo. So, and she's also got a lot of Virgo in her chart too. So, she wrote, "Intense frustration is one of the more recognizable Mars-Pluto experiences. Passions are forced into introversion, and often this seems like fate, because it is the outer object of desire which appears to offer the refusal. One cannot have what one wants in the outer world without the downward journey. It seems as though Mars-Pluto is often forced to accept a double bind, to acknowledge and value the primordial qualities of nature, yet at the same time to accept the frustration in the expression of those qualities until they have been purified by fire." So that could, yeah, the frustration, of course, relates strongly to the Saturn piece, as I was saying, but as well to just bring in that transformational part with Pluto, the evolution of the soul, and what we can really do with this time, and perhaps to the extent that we feel frustrated is the extent that we will be transmuted by and purified by the fire of this time. Perhaps said another way, like the suffering is proportionate to the purification and the sort of sanctification, perhaps even of what we're enduring through this time. And as well, just to echo the common way of looking at it, and very true, it takes times of having things made impossible for us or taken away from us to awaken us to what we really want. And so if nothing else, perhaps we can gain clarity on what it is that we really want and what we're going to make our lives stand for as a result of having come through the fires of 2020, and what is it all going to mean for us as we make it, as you know, time and Saturn and it all sort of does its thing on us, and we can make sense of it and turn it into something. So the pyromancy, the reflection, for the Zoroastrians, fire is the Holy Spirit from which all life was born, the first element. So yeah, just as I was saying, so what action do we want to take? What desire is ignited in us? And we have been given this extended period of time to make manifest the impulse of the Aries season and Mars in Capricorn period. So, you know, when that when the cycle began earlier this year in March and April, what was born in those fires and now comes to the first quarter square. We've got this, this retrograde period and square to Saturn and square to Capricorn. So yes, there's that thwarted, frustrated aspect, but there's something going on within the fires of this. It's like this container that we can't get out of this situation. So we have to sort of allow it to do its thing on us. And what is it? What is it? We get to actually we have this amazing gift of looking at it for a longer period and really getting time to meditate on it and really feel into it and what it is all about for each of us personally. Something that is being born out of the difficulties of this year. And yes, that I've sort of spoken to all of this already in relation to this process that has unfolded through this COVID-19 time. And are we able to use this time to take right action, like in a matured and tempered way, like taking notice of the Capricorn part that we can only do what we can do at any given point. And what we can do right now might be seriously limited, but there's something that we can do within this fiery time. And it may simply be like meditation or contemplation or just being with the discomfort and going to that edge inside of us that is unpleasant and frustrated. But yes, in whatever it is, we can plan for and take whatever meaningful steps in the direction that we want to go. But where do we go now that it's the end of the world as we know it is the question. Yeah, we have no idea where this is all going. So the about face that we're on the cusp of, the Saturn station direct on the 29th of September at 25 degrees and 20 minutes of Capricorn. Saturn retrograde period from almost 2 degrees of Aquarius on the 11th of May. And Saturn returned to Capricorn on the 2nd of July in my time. The Pluto station direct on the 4th of October. I've missed something here, haven't I? Okay, well, I'll just talk to what I've got here anyway. Pluto station direct on the 4th of October at 22.5 degrees of Capricorn. Pluto retrograde period from 24 degrees and 59 minutes of Capricorn on the 26th of April. That retrograde period began. And the Ceres station direct on 18th of October at 28 degrees and 36 minutes of Aquarius, which correlates very nearly precisely to Mercury's retrograde so I've written there, recall Mercury retrograde in Pisces season, like February, March 2020, Mercury retrograded from around about the same degrees of Aquarius, of Pisces back to the late degrees of Aquarius as well. So there's something here about that for me, and I think it's really worth reflecting on in personal lives and what it comes to for me. So yeah, today Ceres retrogrades back into Aquarius, and the Aquarius piece of this is important, I think, because it's sort of brings the attention to Aquarius, and of course there's going to be plenty of attention on Aquarius in good time, with Jupiter and Saturn both entering there at the end of the year. So and that whole cycle commencing, the great conjunctions being in the air signs for the next 200-ish years. So this whole new air element coming in, which of course we have experienced with the Libra conjunction of 8081, and then the mean conjunction in Gemini as well in 2000, and now in Aquarius, the both being in this Aquarius. So the Aquarius is obviously a very interesting place for this to all take place, and the archetype being correlative to many things, but among them is the group, and the group, so on that axis with Leo, me within the context of the group, and how the group can quickly become quite distorted in its expression. So although a group can come, like a group of very good people can come together, I say good people in quotes, you know, like well-intended, perhaps is a better way to put it. People with very good, noble intentions come together for a common good. And at the formation of the group, it quickly distorts somehow. There is something that happens within groups that it's like, perhaps it's like a common denominator thing, lowest common denominator, like something like that. But I wouldn't want to demonize anybody in particular, because we all bring our lowest possible qualities to the group. So and they tend to amalgamate into something very unhealthy. I don't want to say that all groups are bad. It's not really what I'm saying. I believe in community, and I believe in, you know, there's obviously positive qualities and positive aspects to Aquarius. Of course, it's an amazing visionary, you know, revolutionary energy, but certainly that is how damage has been done within human history, is as a result of well-meaning individuals coming together for a common good. And so that's why I want to honor this amazing Libran Sun, Mercury, Uranus in Libra, Venus in Scorpio rising, Jupiter in Aquarius, and Pluto, Neptune, and Moon in Gemini. And this quote says it all for me, Groucho Marx: "I refuse to join any club that would have me for a member." It's worth meditating on, especially as we go into this Aquarian time in 2021. I think it'll, and of course when Pluto moves into Aquarius, and we're sort of in this transitional time of coming into the age of Aquarius and all of that, so-called age of Aquarius. What's that going to mean in terms of who we are as a group of human beings on this ball in space? Remains to be seen, doesn't it? It'll be very interesting times ahead. But yeah, I'm very wary of joining any groups lately. Increasingly that's become a thing, a theme in my mind, because it just seems like the more we polarize to one, like identify with a particular group, means that we disidentify with another, and therefore that thing that happens, that compensatory thing of, so we align with the light, we align with love, we align with so-called truth, we align with democracy or whatever, and behind our backs is the constellation of darkness, strife, you know, communism, you know, like whatever. I'm mixing up my Marxes there, but it's very I hope that provides something to reflect on for everyone. I'm not trying to detract from groups as such, but I think it's worth being reflective and open to the possibility that groups are not all they're cracked up to be. So or at least that they have a shadow, you know, like everything has a shadow. And the brighter the light, the denser the shadow, perhaps. So the Libra new moon, of course, coming to the end of this presentation, we see at this point the constellation of that mutable square cross again, grand mutable cross, yes, with the nodes and Venus opposing Neptune. So and as well, the new moon being conjunct the fixed star spiker, which I really like to think about, because it's one of the pleasant things to think about, possibly, and perhaps it's a very, very strong and conflicted kind of new moon and lunar cycle, the Libra cycle, but it's got that going for it, the conjunction there with the fixed star spiker, so, or speaker, however people want to say it, pronounce it. And there is also, of course, the cardinal T-square activated, and the trine between Mars retrograde, Eris retrograde, Black Moon Lilith, and Vesta, which is potent, and the opposition between the Moon and Eris and Mars, both retrograde still, and the square to Capricorn as well. There is a harmonious aspect to the lunar nodes, which can bring something in terms of our evolutionary trajectory, bringing something out of the past into the present in order to go towards a future. And the mutable cross, as I said, already mentioned, and the Venus trine to Capricorn as well. There's absolutely things of value to be found amidst all of this shit fuckery, as I've named it before. It's all for our benefit, if you ask me. And yeah, Mercury and Juno opposing Uranus, still at this time in the fixed T-square and Hygeia as well. And there's also the trine between Hygeia and Chiron, which is an interesting combination of healing energies there coming out of this Libra new moon. So I'm hopeful for that lunar cycle that comes closer to the end of Libra season, 17th of October. And I just want to make note again of the beauty, to just remind us once more. James Hillman quotes this in his book, Soul's Code, I think. And he had Venus exalted in Pisces. Of all psychology's sins, the most mortal is its neglect of beauty. There is, after all, something quite beautiful about a life, but you would not think so from reading psychology books. Again, psychology fails what it studies. Neglect of beauty neglects the goddess, who then has to steal back into the departments as sexual harassment, into the labs as research experiments with sex and gender, and into the consulting rooms as seductive assignations. All the while, psychology, without beauty, becomes victim of its own cognitive strictures, all passion spent in pushing for publication and position. Without beauty, there's little fun and less humour. Doesn't sound very good, does it? So bring on the humour, bring on the Groucho Marx quips and the slapstick comedies and the moments of beauty, pausing to enjoy the superficial moments of beauty amidst all the chaos and all the destruction and all the obvious horrible atrocities going on in the world. No matter who you are listening to, it can't be denied that there is so much suffering, and all I can say is just let's make an effort to enjoy the little moments of beauty and enjoy one another and be excellent to each other. And Bill and Ted say and Yeah, so Libra season begins, I should say, with Venus conjunction with Vesta, that devotion to love and beauty and the sisterhood. Mercury being opposite to Mars and Eris retrograde and about to enter the shadow zone. So we're already in all of that. So bringing awareness to those things through this month, that not to deny or reject or exclude anyone who identifies on the male end of the gender spectrum. In my use of the term sisterhood, I mean like the femininity, you know, that let's kind of find some common feminine ground through which to relate to one another, to submit, to revere the beauty that exists in this world, even when it's on fire, even when people are sick and dying, even when all of the above. And Libra season will, of course, end on the 23rd of October, and Venus will be trine Capricorn and separating from the mutable cross by this point. And Vesta, I just want to mention Vesta again, who ingresses Virgo on the 22nd of October. Lots of good things to focus on amidst all the challenging difficulties that we're not going to miss. They're happening to us, they're happening around us. Let it all do its work on us and see what comes. In the meantime, can we hold the tension of the opposites in our own lives? Empedocles, love and strife, as Rilke's two opposing poles where God learns. I hope that makes sense, but it's in reference to Rilke's amazing quote about take your well-disciplined strengths and now I've lost the quote out of my mind. So the two opposing poles within humans is where God learns, and we can take our well-positioned strengths and make them the two poles within which we live our lives, and through our lives being the process through which God learns. It's just an amazing idea, and I just love it. And finally, again, Rumi, Sun in Libra. This is how most people live, sleeping on the bank of a freshwater stream, lips always dry with thirst. In your dream, you're running towards a mirage. As you run, you're proud of being the one who sees the oasis, and you're bragging to your friends, "Look, I have the heart vision." Listen now. This love of spying far-off satisfactions keeps you from tasting the real water of where you are and who. The way is who and where you already are. It's sleeping in your very being. That which sleeps and awakens and dreams, the sweet water, is a taste of God. Thanks. Best wishes.